Right. I thought it was really interesting. I was looking into the Abrahamic House of Faith, and that the Catholic Church dedicated it to St. Francis of Assisi, which is noted for environmentalism, animals, and all this different stuff. So it's a way to sort of bridge into global climate change and all this different, I would argue, dehumanizing ideologies that you're talking about, these anti-Christ systems. It's not, again, when is that going to happen? We don't know. But this dissolution of boundaries, or these anti-human ideologies, like I would say global climate change and globalism and the Great Reset and all this Skittle stuff, all this stuff is absolute direct attacks on humanity and us being made in the image of God. And so in Orthodox theology, the more you accept these lies, the more truth dissipates within yourself. You can't be filled with the energy of truth, which is an uncreated energy of God, and also believe in all the koof stuff and be terrified of all this propaganda in the world. So I was curious, we could now just discuss a little bit of this. Fundamentally gets back to an epistemic problem. Is there objective truth or not? Because that's what this antichrist system is ultimately trying to undermine, is the objectivity of truth itself. And we're claiming truth is Jesus Christ, and we're using then logic and reason and scripture and all this different stuff to argue that. But whether it be in philosophy, whether it be in governments, whether it be just in social circumstances, society itself, there is no objective truth anymore. And that is, to me, the ultimate religion of the Antichrist, is that the people are going to worship the Antichrist because they don't believe in objectivity itself.
Yeah, I think that the first delusion that we have to believe is that there's not objective truth, right? We have to believe that truth isn't objective, and by extension, if it's not objective, then it's not a person. It's not a personal logos, right? But those things go together, because one of the results of the fall, in my view, on a personal level, is that we're kind of born into being relativists, right? We're kind of born into being these immature beings that believes or views the whole world as revolving around us. We worship ourselves and we love ourselves first and foremost, due to being sons of Adam. And that's because Adam in the fall, compacted himself with the devil, and then put his descendants under that kind of compact, that they would be born with that concupiscence, or the passions, with that deficiency, that tendency towards evil. Doesn't mean that they're inherently evil. Doesn't mean that their nature is evil. It just means that they're born with that deprivation of grace, and thus the tendency to evil. And one manifestation of that on an individual level for all of us is that we are super self-centered and selfish, and children are this way, right?
Right.
And especially as we grow older, we get into our teenage years, that manifests and all of us in a very rebellious and selfish way. So we're all that way. But that is because we are, in that sense, born into, in a very limited sense, so be careful what I'm saying here, into the devil's world, okay? Right? I don't mean literally the devil's world, right?
Right.
But as John says, right, that he calls it this cosmos, right, is fallen. And he's talking about the present state of the world, right, as, quote, the devil's. But it's not ultimately the devil's. Ultimately, it's the church's world and it's Christ's world. But it's been handed over for a time, right, to the devil to wreak havoc and to tempt everybody, and to have his time before the eschaton, where the devil and the Antichrist and all that are thrown into the lake of fire. And there's a complete end to that reign of wickedness and rebellion. But there will always be that temptation of man to relativism. And what relativism is, in my view, is just a manifestation of that principle that's in the garden, where Adam and Eve are tempted and they say, I will determine what's true, right? Remember what Satan offers. He says,
yes,
God doesn't want you to know good and evil, because he doesn't want you to have the powers that he has. And so basically the offer is, you determine truth and falsity. You determine good and evil on your own. That's the temptation. And that's just relativism. Right. Relativism is a, recapitulation of the fall, basically.
Right.
And so
and that pride's the mother of all sins. And so getting us into a worldview in which we would then believe in relativistic truth to some sort,
right,
makes the point in which I'm the epistemic judge of what is true then. And therefore I really then am going to worship myself, which is why I think people are naturally then going to worship whoever emerges as the Antichrist. And one of the things I've talked to a handful of clergy about is, I speculate, and I obviously don't know any more than anybody else, but that the Antichrist will be, if Christ is fully God, fully man, the Antichrist is going to be like half man, half machine. I believe he's going to be a homosexual, rule a one world government from Jerusalem, and people are going to worship him because he will be hooked up to the AI. He will be hooked up to the 5G satellites. He will be able to know what's going on in Beijing and Rio de Janeiro and LA all at the same point. And so you're looking at a man, but he's hooked up to this entire globalist, interconnected digital network, which is going to give him the sort of false accoutrements and attributes we associate with divinity. And that's why he's going to be worshipped as this sort of a false inverted God incarnate. And I think we're already seeing that with the metaverse and everything else that's laying out right now.
Yeah, the metaverse, as you pointed out, is like the ultimate mimic of reality, right? So like you have truth, you have the real world, you have objectivity, and then the metaverse, in my view, which again coincides with your analysis, is like it's an attempt to offer to mankind a version of his imagination that he could live in, and then he can, in a way, pretend to be his own God in that imaginary world.
Right.
And I can't think of any more seductive kind of, deceptive offer to mankind than something like that. It has to be satanic in origins, right? And again, even as you know, that there's nothing wrong with tech itself, but the offer, right? But the tech is only as good as the user of the tech, and so
if the will that's put into the tech.
Well, and also if we've been trained in virtue, right? So one of the reasons, for example, that we couldn't be given the tree of knowledge of good and evil yet is that we weren't trained in virtue yet. And so, some of the Eastern Fathers talk about the fact that, God created both of the trees. And so if he created them, they can't be inherently evil. So the tree of knowledge isn't an evil tree, but it's a tree that man wasn't ready to eat yet until he had been confirmed in virtue. Because if you have a lot of knowledge, but you're not confirmed in virtue, the knowledge can be used for evil or destructive.
Right.
And so man had to be perfected in the virtue of obedience and love of God first, and then he could have of that tree, and it wouldn't be a temptation for him. And so in the same way, a lot of this tech knowledge, I wrote an essay many years ago that's in, I think, my first book, about how, knowledge without wisdom is just destructive. Like it's like giving, would you give a handgun to a baby? No. Right.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. So in the same way, we have to be trained in virtue before these amazing kinds of technologies wouldn't be to our own demise. And the unfortunate thing, I think, is that a lot of this technology is intentionally being constructed and used to undermine humanity. It's not being used to lift up humanity. It could be. I mean, theoretically, it could be.
Right.
But it's probably not going to be used in that way.
No, it doesn't seem like it is at all. And, you've been ringing the alarm well before 2020 about the digital currencies, about, aspects of the Great Reset, the lockdowns, the fake alien invasion, something I just saw you share, which again is this presupposition that we need to form a one world response, a one world government, that we're going to have, I literally they referred to like a mothership. This had to do with, for those who don't know, Jay recently shared it, so go check out his social media, but it's an NBC sort of headline that they did on their world news with a Harvard professor talking about how, well, some of these balloons and some of these UFO sightings, this might have to do with, we're in contact with aspects or messengers from the mothership. And it's like, what are you talking about? But if you're in this relativistic gook that people believe in, well, then you're going to, just like the Koof, you're going to believe your authorities. You're going to believe, the guy on TV who told you the mothership's just outside the stratosphere.
Yeah, one thing that relativism does, and I think why the power elite really like it as an ideology, is that it weakens the people and makes them very pliable. And so you're basically putty for social engineers, for people in Silicon Valley, for people in the ad agencies to be essentially exploited or used at will. And you can be steered however they want. And humans will always kind of be deferring to some authority, right? So if it's not God, if it's not truth, you may think that, oh, I just follow myself and my own desires, man. You know, I'm my own God or whatever. Like you may think that, but you're actually going to be propagandized very easily, because you don't have any root. You don't have any way to judge truth and falsehood, because you surrender the notion of truth and falsehood by being a relativist. So you're basically just putty for the system to be programmed with the next thing that comes along. And you know that when we talk about the NPC meme, the reason that the NPC meme works is because of what we're talking about. Right. Because it resonates. We can realize and recognize that these are people that don't have any critical thinking skills or ability to, separate truth from fact, or from falsehood, fact from fiction, because they're completely propagandized, because they do not love the truth. And so they're sent strong delusion, for example, as Seth Thessalonians talks about. Right.
Right.
So, yeah, so you're basically just silly putty, and you will accept the next download that the system wants to give you.